This Week in Habsland. I'm Brian, he's Jordan, and we are here each Monday to discuss all things Montreal Canadiens. Find us on the socials at HabslandPod. On today's episode, I will be answering a mailbag of your questions along with a doozy of a question from Jordan, who at the moment is on yet another secret mission, this time on behalf of, I think it's the International Space Station. I think I overheard the words three-body problem. Don't really know what that means, but anyway, he recorded his question for me along with his headline and a response to one of your questions, a listener's question, and he evidently did that from some underground observatory somewhere. He sent those in, so I'll be putting those into this episode as we get to those topics. But before we get to any of that, before we get to the mailbag and the headlines, I want to first talk about the week that was for the Montreal Canadiens. Last episode, we covered up until the St. Louis game against the Blues. So this week started in Dallas on Sunday afternoon with an amazing overtime victory, 4-3 over the very strong Dallas Stars. Lane Hutson obviously was the hero in that game, scoring the overtime winner right off an offensive zone faceoff. Puck comes back to him. He sees that there could be some time and space on the weak side of the Stars D zone, and he attacks that space. Lane Hutson is so good at that. He's truly a marvel to watch when he's creating time and space for himself. And in this case, and in every case when it's 3-on-3 overtime, it's not even fair. The space already exists. It's just a matter of him getting the puck and then exploiting the space he's given and making the most of the opportunity. Give him an inch and he'll take 40 feet. It truly seems like that. And then he's going to rip a shot in to win the game. We were definitely correct at the start of the year when we said that his shot had improved significantly. It has worked on many occasions now this season, and every time it does, it looks like a repeatable skill, something that he can do night in, night out. He may not get onto the score sheet with a goal every night, but he can certainly attempt it every night, and very often it's going to work. And not only that, but you can so see how confident he's becoming with the shot. Last season especially, but even into the start of this one, Lane was very often looking off surefire shooting opportunities, and he was, not willing to shoot, making less effective passes instead, which, to be fair, it kind of makes sense when you're surrounded by guys like Suzuki and Caulfield and Slavkovsky and Demidov and all this skill everywhere. Sometimes you're like, yeah, he's got a better shot than me. I'm passing him the puck. So it's partly that he has these options around him. It's partly like he didn't want to be the guy to take the shot. Not anymore. He's now taking the shots when the opportunities are there. He's still making the pass when it is the better option, though. And that's really important. Like, to be able to pick what the better option is in a split second, he's been very, very good at that as well. And to be able to attack in both of these ways so effectively makes it so that the opposition can't fully commit one way or the other, because he'll switch on a dime and make you pay. Play the shot. He'll find the seam pass that you just gave him to Suzuki or Caulfield or one of the other shooters, block that passing lane, and he'll waltz in and beat your goalie. He's been lethal. Our young D-man is 1 point behind being point per game so far this season in well over half of the games, or a few games over half, I'd say. 44 points in 45 games, and 8 of those points are goals. Now, of those 8 goals, 3 of them have been game winners. Hutson is a clutch offensive defenseman who, at the moment, is blossoming before our very eyes. The Calder trophy was just the very, very beginning of his career, obviously. How incredible would it be for him to go point per game this season after Nick Suzuki was the first guy in about 20 years to go point per game just last season? It would be pretty damn special, especially from a defenseman. Lane is also getting better and better on the defensive side of the game, though. Like, obviously, the offense is so blatantly, clearly elite, but the defensive side of the game is still crucially important, and he's getting better and better at it. He blocked 9 shots in his last 3 games. His stick has been such a nuisance in the opposition's passing lanes, and his style of chasing guys down, like that high energy style of chasing you down when you have the puck, it's super effective even despite his small frame, because he's using the stick. He's getting the stick inside the triangle, lifting your stick, getting that puck off you, and finding an outlet pass really quickly. So evidently, the sophomore slump does not affect Lane Hutson, and thank goodness for that. After the Dallas road win, the Canadiens came back home for 3 games, 2 of which were back-to-back, and they were also fantastic, no-doubter victories, those being obviously the 4-1 win over the Flames and then the 6-2 spanking of the very injured Panthers. Love to see that the Montreal Canadiens are still upholding that streak of wins against the Florida Panthers, and yes, like I said, they had some injuries, some key players who are out, but hey, you can only play the team that's in front of you, and they beat them. So that's fantastic. And then there was the third game of the week, or I guess the third game at home of the week, the fourth actual game of the week, the one that is still leaving a very awful taste in my mouth, but I suppose we have to take the good with the bad, and a 4-0 shutout loss to a divisional rival on home ice, I'm pretty sure is the definition of bad. It's right there in the NHL dictionary next to the Winnipeg Jets without Hellebuck. I talked a bunch about Lane Hutson before, but another young star who has had a great few games of late is Juraj Slafkovsky, coincidentally from the same draft class. His game picked up considerably a few weeks back, and he's been a dynamo ever since. 5 points versus Dallas, Calgary, and Florida, and just an all-around energetic beast in those games. His line mate, Oliver Kapanen, had 5 points right alongside Slafkovsky in those same 3 games, and he is just still potting every puck he can find. Over the past couple weeks, I've said on a few occasions, he picks up his shovel and he goes to the front of the net, and Demidov or Slafkovsky or Hutson or Dobson or someone else makes the brilliant play to get him the puck. And I fear that I've been understating his ability to get to the right areas, because replace him with Josh Anderson, replace him with Brendan Gallagher, replace him with any number of the not obviously elite forwards that the Montreal Canadiens have, and they are not potting half of the goals that Oliver Kapanen has been able to. There's a sneakiness to his game and a willingness to go to the front of the net, and he's been clutch in that respect, like being able to get to that area and then actually put the puck in the net. He's been great. Caulfield, Suzuki, even Demidov have been decent. They haven't been on the score sheet as much of late the past several games, so it's been phenomenal to see these other 3 members of the top 6 contributing in such a major way. Kapanen, Slafkovsky, and now it's time for me to jump into the first headline, which will be mine, and it's about the 6th member of the top 6 that I have not mentioned yet. My headline is about one of my favorite storylines this week. It is pair of primo performances. What a couple of games from Alex Texier. I was so impressed with the way he played in those back-to-back home games versus Calgary and then Florida. He very clearly rose to another level on Wednesday night and on Thursday night. Texier scored a hat trick versus the Panthers, which for the Montreal Canadiens, for a Montreal Canadiens player, was the first in over a year. Patrick Laine was the last guy to do it near the end of 2024. When he potted that hat trick of power play goals against the Sabres. I was at that game. That was insane. The difference between those two tours du chapeau is that Laine stood in one spot on the power play and fired basically the same shot 3 times, whereas Texier scored in 3 different ways at 5-on-5. And then Texier also netted another goal versus the Flames, and he added 2 assists. But on top of him hitting the score sheet those 6 times, on top of his 9 shots on goal, on top of the game-winning goal, which it ended up being versus Florida, and then the ones after that really put the nail in the coffin, and then on top of all of his points being at even strength, which just those few things put together, all of that would be awesome enough. His tenacity might actually be what's impressing me the most. Many, I'd say more than most, of Texier's opportunities this week came from his ability to drive the net forcefully and then to hold his position there until the puck got to him, fighting at times much bigger defensemen than he is. He had a tip goal, he had a tap-in goal, and he had a rush goal, all with the exact same theme: head towards the net. So, obviously, Alex Texier's recent results are super encouraging, especially given the fact that we've been pining for another guy in the top 6, especially somebody who can play with Suzuki and Caulfield in Slafkovsky's absence, and that's just been super encouraging. The way that he heads towards danger in the offensive zone is excellent, and the eye test is really starting to glow in little bursts, these two games especially, but in general, you see these little flashes of, oh wow, there's a ton of skill there. But on top of all that, there's also a much deeper story here that extends to the entirety of the first line. The line of Caulfield, Suzuki, Texier is now the best line that the Canadiens have put out this season in terms of expected goals percentage. They are sitting at 63.5% right now, so nearly 2/3 of the expected goals are for the Montreal Canadiens. They're for the Habs when that line is out there. That's better than the Caulfield, Suzuki, Slavkovsky line that we all love. It's better by like a couple percentage points there, and it's far better than any other Habs line this season. And that's only including those that have played. I think I put the stipulation at 50 minutes or more together to get, at least a couple games, a few games worth of a sizable amount of 5-on-5 time to get a real look at it. But it's not only the other Habs lines that pale in comparison. Let's look at where they are ranked across the entire league of offensive trios. Of any NHL line, of any forward line that has played at least as much time at 5-on-5 as they have, the Habs' current first line of Caulfield, Suzuki, Texier is 15th in expected goals percentage, and they are 8th in goals for per 60. 8th. That's really impressive. So the results are terrific. That's the goals for per 60 being 8th in the league. And then the underlying numbers and analytics are glowing too. That's the expected goals percentage. So very clearly, this line works really well. And as I said before, that is a huge relief after seeing how much Slav has helped Demidov and Kapanen on the second line. Two really functional lines in the top six is exactly what you want. Now, obviously, there are question marks revolving around the underlying numbers for that second line, but results-wise, it's worked so far. And Marty clearly believes in his top six. He's relying on them a lot, and they are more often than not the most crucial members, along with like Hutson, Dobson, Matheson at times, in terms of getting victories. And then there's the goaltending, which has been great, but like this top six has been really impressive, and Marty really believes in this top six. So I'm really genuinely curious to find out what's going to happen when guys start coming back. Is the top six going to remain the same when forwards start returning from injuries? But to be honest, like barring some type of regression, I really believe Marty likely will be leaving this line together for the foreseeable future. Whether it's Doc coming back or whoever, I don't know that it affects this. We do have a question in the mailbag regarding the Habs while healthy, so I will dive deeper on that idea later on. But for now, suffice to say that St. Louis will have some very, very difficult decisions to make when Doc and Newhook and all these other guys return to the lineup. Now, I'm going to bring Jordan in for his headline of the week.
Hey there, Brian. I wanted to chime in a little bit this week with some of my thoughts. So I'll give you a headline for my week and would like to know what you think about it. So my headline is a sign of things to come. And I'm really focusing on Thursday night's victory against the Florida Panthers. I found in the last couple weeks, I've started to get this kind of sneaking suspicion, spidey sense, whatever you want to call it, that the Habs and the Panthers are going to meet in the first round. It has, I will say, all the makings of a young guns team versus the vet team, specifically with the young gun team having home ice advantage. And it has kind of all the markings of that, like you would expect. Now, Thursday night, obviously, I have to say, a lot of guys out of the lineup on both sides. Seth Jones, Brad Marchand, Matthew Tkachuk out for Florida, and obviously Barkov as well. On the Habs end, we know who they are, but Doc, Evans, Gooley, Newhook, kind of chief among them who are missing. So it might not have been the most indicative of what you might see in an April playoff. But again, it's something that's just in my mind now, especially the fact that the Canadiens are now 6-0 against the Panthers over the past season and a half. There's one more game left, ironically, in early April that could potentially have some ramifications on playoff seeding. So it's something that, just kind of keeping in the back of my mind. What I will say about what we did see on Thursday was specifically in that second period, the Panthers really turning up the heat on the Habs. And for what felt like kind of the first time in a long time, the Habs are able to withstand that type of pressure really because of good goaltending. And that's something that we've seen now for the past 4 or 5 weeks, regardless of who it is in this new three-headed monster, some really strong goaltending to kind of keep things level as the Canadians kind of get caved in. And I will say, like, they were playing well defensively, but nonetheless, what was it, 13, 14 minutes without a shot before they get the Texier goal to kind of give them a bit more breathing room. The other thing that was really evident, and this is kind of, again, looking towards a potential playoff matchup, was how much, again, in that second period, the Panthers really focused on, and I know it's just part of their game, having a guy 2 inches outside of the crease at all times in the offensive zone. They always play like this. They are always trying to push the envelope with that. And there was a moment, I think it was Semiskevich, that where he kind of bulldozed into the Habs net, and the Canadians, credit to them, they stood up for their goaltender. But it was just a really interesting thing to watch. Like, it's very much like part of the game plan to have a battle in front of the net and either draw a penalty or play the long game and frustrate the goaltender, or just, good old fashioned tip in front of the net and have someone there, have someone ready. It's something they're going to do. The other thing, of course, was special teams. It was kind of a dead heat, and the Habs penalty kill obviously has had a nice run in the past week or so now. We'll see how much that can be sustained. And obviously the power play is going to touch cold in those last few games. And, it's something else to watch. Like, we know how the Panthers are officiating in the playoffs. And that's something actually that I think, the Panthers love to troll the Leafs. Marchand being the biggest culprit of that, but also Paul Maurice as well. And I do have a question for you about Paul Maurice later on, but I don't think they can pull, because I know they can get inside the Leafs' heads, and it's been proven correct, year over year, that they can continue to do that, and they continue to poke fun at them. And when you're a 2-time Cup champ, you kind of get that leeway to an extent, I guess. I don't think they can pull that same type of stuff with the Canadians. Like, I don't think Brad Marchand will be able to get inside the heads, specifically through the media. And I don't think, and part of that is the fact that the Habs, most of the media for the Montreal Canadiens are Francophone and they speak French. So it's maybe less impactful when Brad Marchand has a quote and you have to translate it, and that might have something to deal with it. But I think it's also the type of players on the Montreal Canadiens that aren't gonna take it. And maybe you look back at last year, now the Habs maybe didn't stand up to the Capitals. I mean, specifically Josh Anderson and then Tom Wills and stuff is kind of front of mind. So maybe Anderson would be a guy that they would kind of look at, but I don't see Suzuki or Demidov or Hutson being those guys that can get rattled off the ice the same way that the Leafs clearly are. So that's maybe one thing the Canadians have a better chance of dealing with than the Leafs. But, that's just, I wanted to focus on that a bit this week because it really is starting to crystallize. And look, the Atlantic is a bit of a blender right now. And it's probably not going to be until the trade deadline at the end of, I think it's early March or end of February. It's early March when we really start to see some things fall into place. Buffalo's coming off their heater. Toronto seems to be revving up just a little bit. Ottawa's in a bit of a disarray, but we can fast forward 2 weeks and the stories might be flipped. So nonetheless, again, spidey senses are tingling about a Habs Panthers 2-3 Atlantic Division matchup. And I thought that just made the game on Thursday a little bit more interesting to look into. So excited to know what your thoughts are about that.
So thank you very much for that, Jordan. There is tons to unpack there, a lot that I'm excited to talk about. The first thing that I want to get into was one of the last things you said, which was just how much of a blender that the Atlantic Division is specifically, and then the Eastern Conference in general. There's a little bit of a stratification that's starting to form, it seems. I mean, you look at the Detroit Red Wings, the Lightning, and then the Montreal Canadiens in the 1, 2, and 3 spot, 58, 57, 56 points. And this obviously, I'm recording this on Sunday night, so depending when you're listening to this week, that may have changed. But then you look at the other teams in the Atlantic. The next team is the Buffalo Sabres at 52 points, Bruins 52, Leafs 51, Panthers 49. So all those teams are very close-knit. But then the Sens have dropped off considerably. They're almost at NHL 500, like they're at 511 right now. And we finally have the first Eastern Conference team in a long time to be below NHL 500. The Columbus Blue Jackets, due to a 3-game losing streak, are now 18, 19, and 7, putting them below Bettman 500. In terms of the Atlantic, I think that the stratification that's occurring right now will make it difficult for the Florida Panthers to wiggle their way back in, and not because they are not capable of it, not because like everybody's injured, because they will start to get those guys back, and that'll help immensely. But they're not the only team doing it. Even if the Sabres fall off, and I'm curious, I wish I could ask you this in real time, but maybe you'll be able to answer this next week or something. But like, I'm curious which of the teams, if the Canadiens end up in the 2 spot, and you're saying that the Florida Panthers end up in this 3 spot, is it the Detroit Red Wings that are going to end up falling off to allow that to happen, and then the Lightning just moves 1 spot up? Is it the Lightning that are going to fall off? Because the way that the Wings have been playing, the way that the Lightning are playing, they're on a 9 or 10 game winning streak right now, something crazy. I don't know. I don't see that happening. And then, the Sabres, that's a whole other just complexity of crazy, like 3 game winning streak after they had that 9 or 10 game winning streak last. So like 9-1-0 in their last 10. They're probably, I don't know what that would make them, 14-1-0 in their last 15, like just absolutely killing it. Most of those at home. They got a really good home record. So don't count the Sabres out. Don't count the Bruins out. The Leafs, like you said, have turned it around. It really seems to be the Sens that are struggling. And then the Panthers a little bit, but like I said, when they return from injury. So it is still just a massive kerfuffle in the East and in the Atlantic specifically. But back to the other idea, which is like, what if that happens? What if they do meet up in the first round, 2 against 3 in the Atlantic? I think that would be a phenomenal series. Like you said, the young guns at home against the vets on the road, that would be super fun. I do think that playoff hockey is advantage Florida Panthers, as we have seen with their 2 cup wins, where the referees put the whistles away. And so some of the stuff that they were called for and the Canadiens were able to capitalize, not necessarily in this past game, but in the past against the Florida Panthers on the power play, those may not arise. You might get 2 power play games in a playoff game, whereas in the regular season, on the same exact game, same exact, things that the Panthers are doing, you may have gotten 5. So the referees indeed do put their whistles away, and so that might be a factor. I love this matchup, especially for the fact that we are 6-0, as you said, versus Florida in the last 6 games against them. And on Florida pestering the goalies in close, it's a really good point, and there's 2 goalies on the Canadiens that I think will do fine in that environment. Both Dobesh and Fowler have a little bit of a fire in their belly for this. If you get too close to them, if you get in their crease, especially if you snow shower them or hit them after the whistle or come a little too close to them, they're going to let you know it. And that's either going to be with a push, a little bit of a stick check. They're going to get animated, and the Montreal Canadiens defenders are hopefully going to get animated as well, and try and get those dudes out of there. But that will absolutely be a tactic of the Florida Panthers if that series is to happen. And then there's Montembeault, who's not like Dobish or Fowler. He kind of just plays his game. If there's a kerfuffle in front or he gets hit, he kind of just skates away and tries to just, stay in his focus mode and not get drawn into the craziness. So that's sort of an interesting, I guess, contrast between the types of goalies in our little tricycle that we've got going at the moment. And just while I'm on that topic, on the topic of the goalies, just quickly, Monty's got his game back. Fowler's still playing well, whatever, rough in Detroit, but whatever. That whole game, the Montreal Canadiens weren't great. Detroit capitalized. They're a good team, first in the Atlantic, fair enough. And then there's Dobesh, who also is playing well. He's been playing less lately. The other 2 dudes are taking the lion's share of the starts, but it's nice to have 3 goalies in the rotation that seem to be having relatively consistent play. And so obviously that means that the send down and bring back up worked for Montembeault. I also do happen to think that it's just the team in general that's playing better in front of them, but that is a factor. To get back to your initial idea, Jordan, once again, thank you for this, because that would just be sick, a series between the Montreal Canadiens and the Florida Panthers. And then if the Montreal Canadiens were to win the first series, and whatever, maybe they lose the second one. Let's be pessimistic for a half second. At least they will have beat the reigning Stanley Cup champs, 2-time champs, and that can never be taken away from them. And it would be a tremendous learning experience on how to win against a team that plays this way, because they are not the only team that plays that way, and those teams tend to do very well in the postseason. Oh, and then just one very last thought on this that I almost forgot about. But I do like the idea too. I think you're probably on the right track that the Panthers in terms of their off ice shenanigans, whether it's the coaches, the Marchand, the guys in the room talking to the media, I do think that they do tend to get into the Leafs' heads, especially after those victories, like you said. And I agree with you. I don't think they'll be able to get into the Montreal Canadiens' heads as readily. I just don't think. Well, first of all, the Habs don't have the lack of success and ensuing craziness from their media that the Toronto Maple Leafs have, where, like, only this many series wins in the entirety of Austin Matthews' tenure as a Toronto Maple Leaf. Like, just that fact, and the fact that the core four didn't work and that everything else isn't working, like, just that is enough to rattle a team immensely. The Habs don't have that. They've been in the midst of a rebuild. So, like, yeah, the team's been bad, but they were supposed to be bad. That's part of the rebuild. That's how you acquire the necessary players to then get out of it, which the Montreal Canadiens are doing right now. Also, just immaculate vibes across the board for this team. They've gone through injury after injury, and yet they're still able to bring next man up and then win games. So I do think that getting into the heads of the Montreal Canadiens will be much more difficult for the Florida Panthers. They can try all they like, but I think Marty and Suzuki, the leaders of this team, are not going to let that stuff happen. All right, so that's going to do it for the first half of this episode. The headlines, we're done with those. We're going to jump into the mailbag now, where you guys have sent in some questions. I should have enough time to get into a handful of them. Jordan has also sent a few my way, including one that he actually, did a voice recording of. And I actually think that's the first one that I'm going to get into. I'll answer the other couple that he sent me, along with a bunch of yours as well. Thank you again for sending them in. Here is Jordan with his question.
Hey, Brian, me again. So I sent you a couple questions that I want to hear your answer on, but one in specific that I wanted to give additional context to. And this is, this is something that irks me, but the concept of a team's identity, I find really fascinating in the discourse in hockey. So my question to you, and this is kind of, Brian, response level, impossible difficulty. What is the Montreal Canadiens' identity? And try to answer the question without talking about discipline, because I find typically when people talk about, this team has a really good identity and this and that, it's really just code for they don't take a lot of penalties. Honestly, like when people talk about identity, that is mostly what they talk about. They talk about toughness and they talk about discipline. And it's usually a roundabout way of saying it's a mature team, right? So absent that, because first of all, the Canadiens have no discipline when it comes to taking penalties. So that's something that's already thrown out the window. What is the Canadiens' identity? And I want to add a little bit more context on top of that. And this comes from something that actually Paul Maurice said on Thursday. Now, again, this is kind of and I mentioned it in my headline, the Panthers and the Tampa Bay John Cooper do this as well. Like, they love pumping the tires of their opponents. And I think it's especially important to kind of identify that. Who's pumping your tires? It's the coaches of Tampa Bay and Florida, which means they kind of are starting to see the Canadiens as a bit of an adversary. But nonetheless, this is the quote from Paul Maurice. There's no sense skating all over the ice against this team because you won't catch them. Their game is markedly different than it was 2 years ago. Every team in the NHL has a style, and I think in some ways Montreal is kind of a new team, a new style of game, because theirs is still changing as they become more mature. Montreal is an evolving, changing, highly skilled team, so we're still learning how to play against them, end quote. So I think that is actually kind of helpful context of Paul Maurice. I think quite honestly, I don't think he's lying there. I do think he's trying to pump the Habs tires, but I think he's being honest in his assessment when he's saying it is an evolving team. We are figuring out how to play against them. And I think that's probably loops nicely into, at this moment, January 2026, 4 years into the rebuild. And I think whether you consider yourselves the Habs out of the rebuild or not, whatever, what is the Montreal Canadiens' identity? What defines them when you watch them play? For years, it was really limited goal scoring, not a lot of size, good amount of speed, depending on the year, either goaltending or special teams or both carrying them. So again, my question to you, Brian, is what is the Montreal Canadiens' identity? And try not to answer using the word discipline.
So, Jordan, I think the clear answer here is absolutely the identity of the Habs is discipline. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I agree with you that it's kind of nauseating that the only thing that anybody seems to talk about when you're talking about the discipline of a hockey club is, or about the identity of a hockey club, I should say, is whether or not they take penalties a lot. Discipline is such a small part of what is actually encompassed within the idea of a team's identity. It is a factor, certainly, but like I will gladly leave that out of my answer here, as it is not the main thing. I think the key word I want to use to get into the actual answer here, I think the key word I want to use for the Montreal Canadiens' identity is speed. And that's not just the obvious, which I'll do the obvious one first. The speed with which they attack through the neutral zone, especially the top six. Your Ivan Demidov, your Slavkovsky, your Suzuki, your Lane Hutson, especially your Mike Matheson. Like when they go up and down the ice with the puck, it's speed all day. It's trying to catch the opponent sleeping. It's counterattacks. It's the ability to strike. And so obviously I think that that's a big part of the Montreal Canadiens game. As you pointed out with that Paul Maurice quote, is like, it's an ever-changing thing, but they have a high amount of skill and they have a high amount of speed. And that's huge. The other reasons why speed is the key word, at least for me in this topic, is defensively, this hybrid system of defense. It only works when the defensemen and the forwards of the Montreal Canadiens, while defending, when their processing speed and their ability to read the opposition's attack is fast enough. That system breaks down so easily and so quickly when the opposition outsmarts you and you're not able to react fast enough. What do we see time and time again that this system allows for is the opposition getting a man in close, sometimes as close as the crease, but whether it's low slot or high slot, somebody right in front of the net with nobody covering them. That's the system breaking down. And that's a testament to the fact that this is still a very young team, as you pointed out. And so there's going to be inconsistencies in defending, as there will be in other areas. But moving forward, when this team is playing well and when they're performing at their best, one of the things that's going to be pointed out is how rapidly, let's say, Noah Dobson will recognize that his line mate, maybe it's Mike Matheson at the time, his partner at the blue line, will have moved out of position to go to the closest man, because in that part of the ice, they're playing a man-to-man. And so Dobson has to recognize that and get off that man and go to the next one. And so those are all the little things that they're going to be building over time, and that we can already see is light years ahead of where it was, where like 1 out of every 6 games they would get it at the beginning of last season. And that's why they were like, I forget what it was, like 4-11 or something in their first 15 games, something crazy. And now they are not that. They're performing much better. The goaltenders are performing better behind them, etc. So that's another reason why the speed is such a factor. And then maybe the third reason why I think speed is the right answer is because the processing speed of the Montreal Canadiens and the ability for them to be deceptive is what's allowing them to be scoring so many goals. Yes, they have an immense amount of skill. Alex Texier, Cole Caulfield, Ivan Demidov especially, Lane Hutson, Nick Suzuki, Slavkovsky's starting to. Like these guys all have sick hands. Kirby Dach, when he's healthy, could get up to that level again. Like all these dudes have really good hands. Alex Newhook has incredibly fast hands, but the ability to also process the game, the way I was talking about the defense, like when you're defending and you're processing and you're reading a play and you're able to read it 2 steps ahead before the opposition has made that seam pass, and you get your stick in that lane and it defends it. The same way you can be reading a defensive pattern and like Lane Hutson, who I talked about earlier, like seeing that there's open space. And I know that was 3-on-3 overtime, but like he saw there was open space. He went to it immediately. He didn't hesitate. That's speed too. The processing speed that Ivan Demidov has, Nick Suzuki has, Lane Hutson have, especially, they're on an absolute elite level of processing speed. I think Dobson and Matheson and Gooley defensively have a really good amount of processing speed as well. Cole Caulfield is up there as well. Slavkovsky's starting to get it. So that's going to be an immense part of the Montreal Canadiens game moving forward. And I think too that the other, like I've just thought of a fourth one along with this speed idea, is like that idea. I think I talked about it last week or 2 weeks ago. We discussed it a little bit about how the Montreal Canadiens defensive strategy, one of them is like, just don't allow the opposition into your zone. Hound them like crazy. So say the first line is out there and Texier loses a puck and then it gets swung around the boards to the weak side. What do Caulfield and Suzuki do? Do they start back checking, back skating immediately to cover the ensuing attack? No, they get on their horse and they chase after the puck carrier right now. Because if you pressure them immediately as the puck's ringing around them boards, maybe it'll go off their stick weird, or maybe it'll pop up into the air, and then Caulfield can bat it out and then give it to Suzuki and they could score. Like they're countering, and their ability to recognize when, I can pounce right now, and they do it, and the lack of hesitation, that is so good, especially against the team that might be holding the sticks a little bit tight. I think that that's a perfect strategy for the playoffs, where the pressure mounts, more mistakes happen because the pressure has mounted. And so you can capitalize that on that. So I know that was a lot. I've been excited to answer this question all week because I do think that speed is the right answer, at least in part. I know there are other elements to their game that we could get into, but I've talked on your question enough, I think, at this point, Jordan. So my answer is speed and discipline, just to piss you off, buddy. Okay, next question comes to us from Canuck. He says, love the pod, appreciate the thoughtful takes and your willingness to offer unvarnished opinions. Thank you very much, Canuck. We are certainly unvarnished. Question for Mailbag. Who and what do you read, follow, and trust to help inform your views? I'm going with this question first because this was one that Jordan felt strongly enough that he actually recorded a little answer and sent me the voice clip. So I'm going to go to his answer and then I will answer it right after. Thank you for the thoughtful question, Canuck.
All right, me again. I wanted to answer one specific question that we got because I thought it was really, really interesting. It's something I'm kind of excited to talk about and just kind of explain some of our, at least my own. I'll speak for myself only. Brian, I'm sure you have your own answer here. So the question we got from Canuck on Spotify was, who and what do you read, follow, and trust to help inform your views? And I think this is a really important question, especially in the day and age of, people trying to have the same opinions or different opinions. And like, what is the right balance to intake from your media? I mean, we're talking sports media here. It's nothing too overly serious. So broadly speaking, and this is more of a rule that I have, and then I'll get into who I kind of pay attention to. I really try to mix it up, and almost more importantly, never try to listen to someone for too long. So I will often find myself, for instance, we've referenced the Dangle podcast a bunch of times. Those are really good podcasters, but I make sure that I kind of don't listen to every episode or don't even listen to every second episode. And it might be a thing where I'll listen to those guys for, a week, and then I'll take 2 weeks off and not listen to them. And I'll do the same with a bunch of the other ones I'm going to mention in a minute. But really, it's because I want to make sure I'm able to A, stay informed, B, have my eyes open to different perspectives, and C, most importantly, maintain my own perspective. So I want to always make sure that I am not just parroting someone else's opinion, which is at times while you will hear me reference a Basu Godin podcast or the SDP podcast or Brian Wild or Eric Engels. And the list goes on and on. And again, I'll get into that in a second. But there's also a reason I don't mention those reporters, media personalities every week or even every other week. It's because I very much intentionally try to not stay with them for too long. And I'll kind of come back and forth. So maybe I'll miss 2 or 3 weeks of context sometimes. And I'm sure folks do this with us as well. And I totally understand that. Hopefully, Brian and I are providing a bit more entertainment. So you don't just come for our opinions, you come for some useless shenanigans that we try to concoct every week. But yeah, that's kind of been my approach. In terms of like what I listen to, I kind of have my Montreal group and my NHL wide group. So the Montreal group, in terms of podcasts, it's, again, a very a split, and I'm not listening to every episode, especially with the frequency that some of these folks drop. But Game Over Montreal, Sick Pod, Basu Godin are kind of my main 3, and I can hear the groans about the Sick Pod. With Tony, it is really dependent of who his guest is, and I will mix in whether it's a Pierre McGuire guest appearance or an Eric Engels or Brian Wild. Really try to mix it up. There's some stayaways, obviously. I think people know who they are, but yeah. But with Tony, it's probably maybe 30 minutes every 2 weeks. It's something like that, right? I'm not listening to him every day because frankly, I can't deal with that many advertisements. But also, I just don't want that same opinion bashed over my head over and over again. Game Over Montreal, I do think, has the highest consistency in terms of content. But again, that one too, it's kind of weave in and out of it. Don't stay too long with it because I want to be making sure that I'm getting my own opinions. In terms of who I'm reading, I've mentioned Eric Engels, Brian Wild, with the exact same caveat. In terms of NHL wide podcast, SDP, I've mentioned them, Bar Down and Daily Faceoff. Daily Faceoff specifically has a truckload of content. And again, that's one where I'm consuming maybe 5% of it, maybe 10% of it. And that's okay. It's just enough to remember other points of view, but not get too bogged down in it where I forget how I feel about something. In terms of who I'm reading, The Athletic has quite good coverage still, I think. And then this can kind of also go to who I've kind of stopped listening to, and that's 32 Thoughts. Since Jeff Merrick left, I find it a complete waste of time. I still find Elliot Friedman very helpful and very resourceful, but I don't need to listen to him talk. Same goes for the Athletic NHL podcast. I think I've mocked them in the past. I don't think they're very good when they talk. I think their writing is still quite decent, and I obviously our Arpin Basu does quite a good job with the Montreal Canadiens. Jack Hahn's another one I wanted to shout out in terms of like learning about the game. Jack Hahn's probably one of the best guys. He has a Substack. It's not cheap, but there's also some free articles you can get as well. But yeah, that's kind of what it is. It's very much a sprinkling all over the place. And I've always mentioned that I can afford to do this because I'm bilingual, but like I really try to mix and match the TVA Spal broadcast, the LDS broadcast, TSN. Yes, I will still sometimes listen to Sportsnet, although much less frequently this year. And I've made my grievances known last month, and then Amazon as well. So I will also make sure in terms of the broadcast that I switch it up. And really, at the end of the day, like it's still the hockey on the ice that matters the most, but it's good to make sure we're not just getting the same opinion over and over again. So if anything, from my response, hopefully the part that makes sense is my perspective of the need for diversification, in my opinion. And there's some other great ones out there. There's other podcasts I listen to as well. There's other people I'll read as well. Those are the ones I just kind of wanted to mention. And yeah, really, it's just making sure I get different understandings, just enough, because sometimes I'll miss things, but it's getting enough of a perspective, but certainly leaving enough breathing room to form my own opinions. And I think what Brian, you and I have kind of done over the past couple of years is hopefully have enough original thoughts to ourselves. And anytime we're bringing up someone else's opinion, it's either to enrich the discussion or to question that opinion and not just simply parrot it. So Brian, I'm interested to know what your thoughts or what your perspective is on the question of, again, what and who do you read, follow, and trust to help inform your views?
Yeah, so I think I'm in a very similar boat, Jordan, where I'll go to multiple sources but try to not stay on one too long. I think that's the most effective way to unbiased is the wrong word, but like to not get colored by one person or one group's opinion too much of the time. You said a bunch about like the broadcasts, what podcasts you listen to, and I'm in a similar boat in terms of that. It's SDP for league wide for the most part, along with a few others sprinkled in, and then the Basu and Godin notebook I think is the best one out there for Habs content. They're well connected. They have long, in-depth discussions about the future, not only about like just the stuff that's just happened. They don't tend to freak out about the little things like some other podcasts do, where like one guy has a bad game at the face-off dot and then he has 45 minutes dedicated to him at how bad he is on face-offs on one of the podcasts. Like they don't tend to do that. They don't get down on guys too much. They're looking at big picture a lot of the time, and that's the stuff that I appreciate. And then in terms of the stuff I actually consume, I'm like easily 90% or more in terms of the time I'm spending is just watching the games. And I mean the game itself. Like I skip through most intermission discussions. I skip through all the commercials. I skip through all that stuff. And I just watch the game. Like that's my favorite part about covering the Canadians, other than like talking with my buddy every week about the team that I love, is like just watching the games and being able to get better at analyzing them. Like that's been the funnest thing for me during this sort of, 4-year, I guess we're 3.5 years. This is our 4th year doing the pod, like getting better at it and getting better at the analysis side of things and being able to watch a game and see what some of the higher level analysts are actually seeing, and then do my best to try and bring that to you guys without any coloring from another analyst out there. So I would say that's probably my answer. Thank you again for the thoughtful question, Canuck. Appreciate that. Next one I'm going to jump to is from our buddy Santi, who at the last iteration of this, the last time we did a mailbag, Jordan answered his question, and he has a very similar question. The one like about a month ago for Jordan's mailbag was, why is Monty such a beep? And on this one, his question is, why is Monty no longer a beep? And so obviously the beep, that's a joke. He's not actually that upset at him. It's just like, why was he so bad and why is he good again? And I think it's a combination of a couple things. I do think that the stint in Laval helped him, the little breather away from the Montreal media, as far as you could possibly get from the Montreal media as best you can, and then going down to Laval. The games likely helped him, that stint. But also, I do think that the team is playing better in front of him, and I still maintain to this day, like I know I'm probably alone on an island in this, but like I maintain to this day that at the beginning of the season, Monty was not playing as poorly as everybody said he was. He was not getting the bounces. I did that segment where I looked at all the goals that had gone in and like all except for a couple of them were not his fault, despite the fact he had a whatever 860 save percentage at the time. Like a few bounces go his way and it isn't that. So like, I do think that how bad he played at the beginning was a little bit overblown. I do think that the Canadians in general are playing much better lately, and they're giving him more run support, and they're giving him a better version of themselves defensively, and that certainly helps. And then the pressure is not all on his shoulders, where at the beginning of the season, like, he was the starter and Dobish was the backup. Now he's one part of a 3-man tricycle, and he's also fighting for his life. Like, he's fighting for his career right now. There's 2 younger dudes, including a very young dude who's like just barely over 20 years old, that are coming for his job, his starter role. So he has to prove at this moment, like, no, I still belong here. Maybe that guy's the guy for the future, but at least for right now, it's still Montembeault's net. So I think that's what he's still trying to prove. And that's very likely what is, allowing him to stay in this. The next question I'm going to go to is from Bram. He asks, what do the Montreal Canadiens look like? What does this team look like when they are healthy? And obviously, this is a really fascinating question because, as I said before, the next man up mentality that the Canadians have, where, a new hole just formed in the defense because Caden Gooley went down. Other dudes had to step up. Engstrom got a shot, and Struble and Jacky have had to have a bigger slice of the pie. And then on forward, like Line A, Newhook, Doc, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, holes had to be filled. And so guys came up. So like a healthy version of this team, I don't really know how to answer this question. I think on defense, it's clearly better. Like, Gooley comes back in, he's the actual member of your top 4 that belongs there, and then Carrier goes back down to the bottom pairing with one of the other guys. And I think honestly, eventually Engstrom is a better option than either Jacky or Struble. Now, you're lacking size and grit and physicality there without one of those 2 guys, especially Jacky. But like, if you're talking sheer skill and defensive acumen, it's Engstrom all day. But Gooley coming back definitely helps that. Like, I think the defense in general, when Gooley will come back, will be much, much, much better. Not that they've been bad, but like that definitely helps. And then on the forward front, it's really fascinating because, as I said off the top, like on my headline, Texier is fitting in really nicely with Caulfield and Suzuki to the point where they have the best expected goals percentage of any line that's been played over, I think, 50 minutes this season for the Canadians. So like, they're really good, and they have 8th most goals per 60 in the entire NHL. So like, that's really impressive among all NHL trios. So do you split them up for a guy who, quote unquote, like, whose pedigree is better, like somebody like Kirby Dach, who has had success with them in the past as a winger and who we've been doubting as a center for years? So is he really that guy? Another thing that I think will happen is, like, Dach, Bolduc, and Gallagher had a really nice kind of tandem on the third line at the beginning of the season. They're actually very close in terms of analytics to that first line that we're now seeing. Like, they're very good as well. They're on par or close to it with those guys. So like, that would be a fascinating one if we start to see that again. But like, you've also got Danault now, and then Evans is going to come back eventually. And Line A, I don't know that he fits into this lineup anymore. There might be a move coming for that. I just don't think that there's the space. There's enough skill. There's enough scoring now. Like, they've been putting up 4, 6, 7 goals and then a couple of shutouts. But, we've been putting up a lot of goals lately. I don't think that Line A is that essential, especially because he can't do all the other things really well. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a skilled top 6 and a relatively unskilled bottom 6 is what they're going with right now. When those guys come back, I think it's going to be a skilled top 9, and then your last trio and maybe your second to last center, like your third center, might be Danault and Evans. But I don't know, man. It's going to get into a situation where there's just too many guys to fill not enough spots. So I know I'm kind of dodging the question because to be honest, I don't really know. I don't know what's going to happen. Newhook coming off of that second line was the end of the world for a while. And then Slavkovsky came in and solved the problem. And then Texier came into the first line and solved that problem. So the next man up has worked. Dach, Newhook, they're both top 6 guys, like potentially top 6 guys that could and should be there, depending on who you ask. And so I think eventually they will get a shot, but it might take one of those top two lines falling off to a certain extent for them to get that chance. And I know for Newhook, that's like 2 months away. So, we can bide our time on that and do these incrementally. But in the case of Kirby Dach, who his return is likely imminent within the next, couple weeks, let's hope, that could be interesting. I would likely see him kind of ease his way back, maybe in the bottom six, but eventually I think you'd want to see him in a top six role. And he's going to be fighting for his contract next year too. So it's going to be fascinating. All right. Our next question comes to us from Phil, and he asks, of the three Montreal Canadiens defensive centers, being Owen Beck, Phil Danault, and Jake Evans, who do you see as the guy for the future? So great question. I think this one is actually fairly obvious and easy to answer, so I probably won't take as long as the other ones, but I think that Danault is out. Like, I can just sort of put him aside. The age, like you talk about the future, the age of Phil Danault kind of prohibits that. So it's great as a stopgap while guys are injured and while Beck is developing, but I think he's very clearly out. And then the question is like Evans or Beck, and Beck, I think, projects to be Jake Evans with a little bit more energy and a little bit more skill. And so I think long-term future-wise, I would love to have Owen Beck be the fourth line center. Like, I think if he's your fourth line center, you've got a relatively strong forward group, because he might project as a third line center with the skill that he has, and he's still defensively responsible, and his faceoffs are really good. So like, we might end up seeing Phil like a 3-4 of Evans and then Beck, or the opposite. But if I absolutely have to pick one, I'm probably picking Beck long-term. Because like the penalty killing that Jake Evans does, all the defensive stuff that he does so well, I think that Beck can grow into that. He's younger, and I'm going to take from context. I assume like by future you mean like when the Habs are contending. So like, yeah, they're in a relatively high playoff spot right now, but this might not be the year where they're going for the cup. So maybe 2-3 years from now, nearer the end of Jake Evans' contract, and as he's coming out of his prime, that's going to be the time for Owen Beck to grab the bull by the horns. All right, next one. I'm going to jump to another one of Jordan's questions. He sent me a few on top of the one that he actually recorded. So his question is, are we overlooking Oliver Kapanen's rookie season? There's been lots of talking, from myself included, Jordan says, of him benefiting from playing with Demidov and Slavkovsky and Newhook, but what about his actual contributions? And then Jordan gives us some context here. So in the Cap era, there have been 14 rookie seasons with 30 or more goals, which Kapanen has at least a 40% chance of hitting this season. 5 winners, and then 6 top 3 finishes. So Ovechkin hit 52, Matthews 40, Crosby 39, and then you go down the list and there's all these dudes, and you get to like Kubalik and Panarin, who just got there with 30. So are we overlooking the rookie season? I'll talk about the we of you and I, Jordan, first, of like the way that we're looking at it. I don't think that you and I have. I've given him his due, and I know that there are those folks out there saying that he just stands there with a shovel in front of the net. I've made that joke before and like said that it's pretty close to the truth, but I also said on this very episode earlier that like he's also the sneaky guy who's able to get into the danger areas without being noticed and be there for the tap in or the tip or whatever the goal ends up being. Like, you still have to be able to do that. I gave this example and I will give it again because I think it's perfect. You put Josh Anderson in his spot, like as the play's developing, you just swap them out, and Josh Anderson knows he has to sneak into the certain spot and then get his stick on the puck and actually put it in the net. I think he has half as many goals as Oliver Kapanen. And it's not, and I'm not just pooping on Josh Anderson. I think you do that with any other one of the, like, not Nick Suzuki, not Cole Caulfield, even Patrick Laine, like, take an immensely skilled guy with a ridiculous shot. He's not quick enough like Kapanen, or I think smart enough to read a play developing in real time and get to the dangerous area. So you and I don't think are overlooking it because we've given him his due. I think some people are, because yeah, what he's on pace for is incredibly impressive, but we can't overlook the fact that he is playing with these juggernauts. Like, Demidov is an incredible rookie, and Slavkovsky is just a unicorn in training, and the training might be soon done. So I think we've given him his due. But by the same token, if he hits that 30 number and becomes one of these like 14 guys, or, you know, it will be 15 if and when he actually hits that number, then I think other people as well will start to give him the due that he deserves. I'm going to jump to one more question from Jordan because I think it's a phenomenal one. And it's one that he would be livid if I didn't answer, and I only answered his other one. So, what would bring you more pain? And you can answer this at home. What would bring you more pain? Mark Scheifele on the Habs or Brendan Gallagher on the Leafs? Can I add a third option of getting kicked in the nuts as hard as the person wants? Because I will take option 3 gladly. I think of these two, I would prefer to see Gallagher on the Leafs because it means that his career is continuing. And yeah, it'll make me throw up a little bit, but like, I love Gally, and if his career is continuing, that's great for him personally. And I do believe, as I've said before on the podcast, like at the end of this contract that he's currently on, his time as a Hab is likely over. So if his career can continue elsewhere, that would be great. And we'd still get a chance to see him, a couple times a year at the Bell Center, which would be fantastic. And then like Mark Scheifele, I've been, there's no secret that I dislike that guy ever since the hit on Evans. And more importantly, the ensuing interviews where it was very clear that he showed very little to no remorse for that. Believing it was his intent was of a clean hit, whatever. I still can't stand that guy. I would hate to see him as a Hab. Very skilled player, super talented, obviously was snubbed by Team Canada. A lot of people think he should have been there and has the skill required to be there. I'm putting all that aside because, I'm in Jake Evans' court, basically. But all in all, I would still gladly take the kick in the nuts. Okay, last question I'm going to do here. I think I've got time for one more. Nikki in Vaudreuil asks, if you had the opportunity to get Austin Matthews on your team for the salary cap hit that he currently has, would you do it? Now, presumably there's no, you don't have to the Habs would not have to give up assets to get him. He terminates his contract with Toronto for the same amount of money, would be willing to sign with the Canadiens. Would you do that? I left this one last in part because I wanted to think about it still for another hour while recording the rest of this episode because I still don't know. I'll give you the pros and cons and then I'll make a call at the end, but I'm very much on the fence. Skill-wise, he's incredible. Money-wise, it's a stupid amount of money. And due to him and the other guys, especially in that core 4 of the Leafs, kind of handcuffed his team for a number of years, not being able to go out and get a serviceable goaltender because they don't have the money, or enough defensemen to have a really solid defensive top 4. Morgan Rielly can't do it alone forever. So yes, they fixed some of those problems, but I digress. On Austin Matthews himself, huge amount of skill, also incredibly defensively responsible. He blocks a ton of shots. He's usually in the right position. He back checks hard. He does all the little things right as well. He's not just a skilled guy who puts up 60 plus goals, and he isn't even that anymore. So you know what? I'm going to lean towards my Habs fandom and just say, no, I would not take Austin Matthews for the money he's currently making. I think that the Habs have enough in the system right now to have an incredibly strong top 6. I think that we're going to have the cap space necessary to go after a guy who's another, maybe not Austin Matthews level, but another player in the top 6 who's worthy of being there. And that's going to be good enough. And they won't make, close to 14, 15 million. They'll be making whatever, 9, 10 even would be totally okay by me. Not willing to give those extra millions. And also we've had this discussion before about how a captain leads their team and about, I don't want to say loser mentality because I have a lot of Leafs fans as friends and I don't want to crap on their team too much, but is Austin Matthews a loser? Does he just lose? And I don't mean in his personal, I mean as a hockey player, does he win in the NHL? And regular season wise, you would say wholeheartedly yes. And then you get to the playoffs and you say, no, he does not. So I know that's not entirely him, but he is the leader of that squad, has been for a number of years, the most skilled member. He chose to take more money. And I think that selfishness element completely goes against the way that the Habs team is run. From the top down, Nick Suzuki taking way a stupid amount less money than he actually deserves. He should be well over 10, 11, 12 million at this point. He's such an integral member of this team. It's such a skilled center, and he took way less than that, less than $8 million. So taking a guy who's the polar opposite of that, I don't think helps the cause. So I am going to say no, I would not just take Austin Matthews at his current cap hit. If at home you are screaming at me, that is completely fair. Like I said, I've been thinking about this one all week and I've been on the fence, but I'm going to lean towards my Habs fandom. So that will do it for today's episode, this week's episode of This Week in Habsland. Thank you all very much for listening. Again, you can catch us on the socials at Habsland Pod. And until next Monday, go Habs.